Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Plugged In. I'm Ellie Mandelbaum, an industry veteran who decided to do more than just listen to podcasts, but actually start one in which I interview people much smarter than me. In this episode, we're speaking with Yaron Samid, a serial entrepreneur with over 500 million in exits, and most recently co-founder and CEO of BillGuard, which was acquired by Prosper in 2016. He advises startups. He advises startup founders, CEOs, and runs Tech Aviv, a nonprofit Israeli startup Founders Club, which he founded in 2007, and we'll get into that later in the episode as well. Tech Aviv has over 3,000 members where they learn and help each other by harnessing their collective knowledge and networks across 6 global branches. Yaron founded 3 technology companies, including BillGuard, which pioneered the use of crowdsourcing to save consumers millions of dollars in wrongful charges and overspending, becoming one of the fastest growing personal finances apps in history. Now it's again Prosper. Prior to BillGuard, Yaron founded a P2P content delivery network, Pando Networks, which was acquired by Microsoft and DeskSite, and led product management teams at Zen, Backweb, and Register.com. Yaron was a founding board director of CloudLock, acquired by Cisco, and Pond5. And there's much more to it, so let's just get right into it, Yaron. Welcome to the show. I hope I covered everything. If not, why don't you fill in some of the details quickly and jump in. There's a lot going on there, and I've known you for really a long time, and there seems a lot more to say.
Well, that was a lot. I don't know if I have much to add, Ellie. Like, that's it. I think we're done. But it's an honor to be interviewed by you. Like I said, if you said, we know each other kind of informally for a long time. So for you to interview me, it's like I have to actually reciprocate because I'm not sure I qualify for the smarter than you criteria for being on this podcast. But I'll do my best.
Excellent. So, get started with, what drove you, when did you first realize you wanted to build, right? You wanted to start your own company?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, I am first and foremost inspired by 2 parents who are highly entrepreneurial themselves. My dad, to this day, he's over 70 and running a startup called BitMint. He's the founder CTO of this company that is building something very much in the spirit of blockchain, but with a central mint for digital money. And so when you have a father like that who throughout your childhood has been kind of doing his own thing, you kind of think that's normal as opposed to getting a real job. And my mother equally is a trailblazer in the field of oncology. And I'm very, very inspired by and love both of my parents. So I think very early on, I kind of got the notion that I could do things slightly differently and in my own way. So while I was born in Israel, I was raised in the States. And I started a career in really marketing to begin with, because I didn't know what I wanted to do in college. And it was very fortunate for me to start, just finish my academic career in 95, which was pretty much the birth of the web, right? Mm-hmm. You and I are old enough to remember those days. Right? So it was incredibly fortunate timing where I was already bent to kind of being a CEO and doing my own things, but the internet really was the incredible ecosystem that I could play in as opposed to a kind of traditional job. Even though when I finished, college, my first job out of school was actually working at Edelman Public Relations.
Oh, I remember. I know them.
In New York City. So, like, top floor in Times Square, right next to where the ball drops. You have to wear a suit and tie, and I was enamored by the whole New York life because I grew up right around the Washington, D.C. area. But 4 months literally into that job, I got fired. And so I was almost forced out of the kind of the suit and tie corporate world by this very nature of who I am. And who I was this really brash 24-year-old kid who had taught himself in college, basic HTML, just because that was the kind of the awesome new thing to tinker around with. I was at the University of Maryland at the time that Sergey Brin, who was at my age, was sitting literally in the same lab, which was in the basement of the parking lot, dreaming up the future of Google. And so it was a very kind of exciting time. And when I went to Edelman, they have this ridiculous 1 hour time in the morning, 9 to 10, where all the junior account executives clip from newspaper stories about their clients with scissors in a newspaper, right?
It's a little old school.
A little old school, but in 95,
Yes,
that was
that-
very, very common,
Yeah.
and it was done that way for 100 years, which is exactly what my boss told me when I said, hey, I have this cool idea, the web thing, this internet thing exists, and I kind of know a little bit. I'm going to build this, basically a bunch of search engine input fields in an iframe, and then I'm going to type in the client field into this page, and I'm going to run it, and then all the search results I'll just print out. And I did that, and I printed it out, stapled it, put my feet up on the desk while everyone else was working for an hour. I worked for about 30 seconds once that page was live. And then I delivered those results to my boss, and my boss was like, that's great. Go back and do it the way we've been doing it for 100 years. And my brash 24-year-old self didn't react to that in a very corporate America sort of way. And long story short, I got fired within 4 months. And so I'm in New York, paying rent. I was living in Brooklyn Heights at the time and had no job. And that was the day I was kicked out onto the street there in Times Square. I said, okay, I have no idea what I want to do next. Let me look for a quick job in order to pay the rent. And I found a classified ad in the newspaper that had the word internet in it. And that immediately caught my eye. I was like, this internet thing, which is not something you do, but something you kind of have fun playing around with. I want to play around with it. If I get a job and get money for doing the internet thing. And that classified ad was for a small company called Foreman Interactive, which was run by the two sons of a guy who's had an amazing, a steel kind of manufacturing company in Brooklyn. But these two young guys, Richard and Peter Foreman, had in 95 bought the domain register.com. Right back when all these domains were starting to be sold, and they invited me to be basically head of marketing at 24 years old because I worked at Edelman for 4 months. It's kind of ridiculous, but they had developed this HTML authoring tool. They didn't know what they wanted to do with it. They had the domain register.com, didn't know what they wanted to do with it, and there I was, one out of, I think we were about 6 or 7 people at the time working in the manufacturing plant of their dad's company, Foreman Interactive. And that company became Register.com. And I got to see from the ground up, and Richard and I are still buddies today, I got to see Richard basically build a $2 billion public company. Even though I wasn't there the whole time, but I got that early sense of wow, you could take nothing and turn it into something on the internet. There was a brand new playing field, and I caught the bug. That was sort of the genesis of me getting into kind of the tech / internet world, and realizing that this guy Richard, who was a very smart Ivy League guy, wasn't necessarily doing anything that was too much beyond what I could do, I thought. And so I realized that this is a path I wanted to get on. I wanted to be founder, CEO, whatever that was in the internet world, and that was the start of my career. That was the very first kind of internet job I had.
So it's funny, that was something, my next question, which you answered, was something you failed at, you got fired.
Yeah.
After 4 months, pay no rent. I mean, you definitely overcame that. So that, that's a great story.
Yeah.
So from register.com, right? So you're doing marketing for, how long were you at Register for?
It was a little over a year, almost 2 years. And then what happened was, this is just at a personal level, I knew I always wanted to go back to Israel. And I had read in Wired magazine, I think it was, an article about this push technology company called Backweb from Israel. And I saw that they were coming to a conference in New York City at the Javits Center. And I said, okay, I'm going to go talk to these people because eventually I want a ticket to go back to Israel.
So I'll stop here and say, so anybody who's listening, there's a key point right here that you got to take into account. Don't be shy. You got to go for it. You got to go. You got to get up, walk to the guy, shake the person's hand, and there's nothing like old school, classic, in a sense, sales, right, or business development.
I'll drive that point home for you, by the way. Before I found them at the conference, I wrote them a proper letter, which got properly rejected, which was, hey, I want to come work for your company, here's my CV. And the head of HR basically said, thank you, we don't have anything for you. And being entrepreneurial and aggressive, I said, okay, I'm not taking no for an answer. This is a perfect company. They have an office in Israel. I eventually want to end up, back in Israel, even though I hadn't lived in Israel, since I was 3.5 years old. But I knew I wanted to always go back. And the way I hacked into this was that I found out they're coming to the conference. I did not buy a ticket to the conference because I didn't have the money to. But I waited out in the hallway until the back web people showed up. And I ran into this young kid my age, Greg Skibisky, who is equally kind of passionate and naive about the internet. But he was very friendly and said, look, I like your hustle. Let me introduce you to this lady, Mickey Nash, who runs a VP of product, I think, at the time. And I don't know, I guess I charmed them with my chutzpah and saying, look, I'm not leaving, and they walked me to their booth so I could hang out with them, which is cool. And I hung out at their booth for like an hour and I was like, I'm not leaving until you give me a job. Basically, I need to do this internet thing and I want to do it in Israel. And so that's how I met Eli Balkat and Neil Balkat. And they gave me a job. And I told them, I want to go back to Israel. They said, listen, we need you in the Valley for a while because we're building up our marketing and product management team. You have a good background for it. And so that was the way I got that job. If I had said, okay, I got a rejection letter, that's it, I would have not ended up at Backweb, where I spent 5 years and learned product management, by the way. I switched from a marketing guy to a product guy at that company, very much thanks to the mentorship and support that Eli gave me. And that was another amazing CEO to be inspired by. Eli Balkat at Backweb did some amazing work there, taking that company public as well from nothing. And so, it was the tenacity that got me in the door.
Yeah, which is something that, a lot of people, I think, don't realize that you still need, right? Just because you get a rejection doesn't mean you stop. If you really want to do it, you go after it and you figure out a way. So, okay, so you worked at Backweb for 5 years. You had 2 years, so 7 years out of school already. So when did you come up with your first startup? Like what made you think, okay, I have an actual product that I could take to market and I could build?
So this is about 2001 now. I've already moved back to Israel with Backweb. Prior to that, I was in Silicon Valley and also Toronto with Backweb. It was a great run there. But then I moved back to Israel. And around 2001, and this is after also I had done another stint where I wanted to leave Backweb and start a company. I was so inspired. And I just didn't know how to do that or what that was. And so in the meantime, to pay the bills, I did some marketing and product consulting. And one of the companies that I started consulting for was a company called Zend, basically the pioneers of PHP. And it was a really good fit. And they made me a very, very good offer to come be the VP of marketing. Still, I'm very young, in my 20s. And they said, yeah, we want you to be VP of marketing. I took that gig for about a year. Learned a lot about open source and community and things like that. And so about a year afterwards, I said, okay, I'm ready. And I had an idea that I was passionate about. Mm-hmm. I've always sort of been and I think a lot of entrepreneurs are, closet artists. You want to do something like make movies or make music, be a rock star or whatever. Basically express yourself creatively. And so I was very enamored by the music business is what was happening in that industry, which was the business model was being disrupted by peer-to-peer Napsters and Scours and those kind of companies were basically forcing the music industry to have to reinvent itself or try to sue these companies out of existence, which they successfully did. But nothing was going to be the same after that, where you realize the internet change the rules of music. And I saw an opportunity to basically connect musicians directly with their fans using the internet. And it was at the time that the CD sales were slumping because people were stealing music online. And I had this kind of basically simple idea, which was put a little bit of software on the music CD itself in order to incentivize people to go and buy the CD, because only if you bought the CD and popped it into your computer would you get this exclusive software that would get you registered to that artist's exclusive channel of content. Like you could only get certain music videos or certain tracks if you installed the software and had it basically broadcast down to your computer using push technology, which is what I learned at Backweb. And so I started working on a company called Fan Networks. That was the original name of the company, Fan Networks. And then in the process of doing that, either I found them or they found me. Richard Gillum, who was starting a company called DeathSite, said, look, this is exactly what we want to do. You have the product chops to do it. We don't. We're just basically a bunch of business guys in California. Let's merge. Let's do this together. And we'll call it DeathSite, or rather DeathSite Music at the time. And I agreed. They had funding. They had a team. And I had the product chops and the idea to go to market with something really special. And that's what we did. We called it DeathSite Music at the time. Now it's just DeathSite. And we started selling to the largest record labels in the world, Bertelsmann, Universal Records, Interscope, etc. I got to go to some amazing parties with at the time we were working with Eminem, Britney Spears, Madonna, etc. It was a really incredible time. And we built really great software that was used by millions and millions of people because these artists were basically saying, like, get my CD to get my DeathSite. That was a really nice segue coming out of the whole push technology era where you could flip the paradigm of going and downloading music from the internet versus pushing really rich media down to your desktop. And that was very conducive for these music videos and big music tracks at the time. And that was DeathSite. That was the first kind of company that I started building from scratch on my own, was DeathSite.
So how was it? I mean, so you didn't have to go for the funding route because you ended up merging with guys.
Yeah.
Sales, like what was the first customer you went after?
So they had a sales team in California, but I actually remember that I was quite involved with that from day one. I think the very first customer was Andrew Maines at Interscope Records. He was running digital at the time. That was a very pioneering thing to do because they didn't really understand what to do with the internet. But this guy Andrew was at Interscope. We became buddies around DeathSite. We built something very custom for them, and that was the very first sale. That deal, which was on Eminem's CD at the time.
Yeah,
I forgot which one it was, like the Marshall Mathers. That CD, I think till this day, if you go into an old record store and buy that CD, you'll see the DeathSite software that we developed and designed. And by the way, I moved back to New York to do this because there's a bunch of record labels both in New York and California, obviously. And I was working out of my sister's apartment with my friend from college. And I said, listen, you do the graphic design, I'll do the product work, we'll go do sales and BD. And it was just such a naive and awesome time.
Well, so it didn't end there. So from there, you went to your next startup, right? So you left there. What made you leave? Like you just wanted a new idea. You felt a new space you wanted to conquer.
So this was a classic example of seeing an opportunity through the limitations of your current company. So the limitation of DeathSite was that our business model was advertising. And in order to run an advertising model, you would have to have a very large number of eyeballs, which we had, millions of fans of these artists. But pushing the media down to your desktop at the time was expensive. And so the margins between the cost of delivery of the really rich media and running ads against that content were not really significant enough to build a meaningful business. And it reminded me back to the very genesis of DeathSite, which was these peer-to-peer based networks were delivering content blazingly fast, amazingly efficiently by leveraging the idle time of all the nodes, the computers in the network who were all sharing the music. So there was something inherently right about how peer-to-peer networks moved bits around the internet, even though the application of it was for illegal file sharing. But so the opportunity that I saw there in my own margins at DeathSite, which just were limited by the fact that we were doing server-to-client push technology, was let's build a content delivery network that was based on peer-to-peer networking. Let's invent a way to push large media between people, leveraging idle computers of people who would participate in the network even though they wouldn't be sharing the file. So I could send to you, for example, a 1 gigabyte attachment of my my kid's basketball game on video by simply attaching it to an email and having it go. And then magically through the network there would be this sort of distribution of the bits and then recollection of the bits on the other end on your computer magically, which was a pretty simple, if you think about it, software problem to solve. It turned out to be more complicated with encryption and security and safety and things like that. But I started exploring that while at DeskSite, and it wasn't appropriate for DeskSite to build a content delivery network, right? We were an application company. And so I saw the opportunity to start Pando. And this is in, I guess, early 2004, if I got my dates right. Yeah. Started working on that. Basically sketched out an idea for a patent on how to do that, even though I'm not a technologist. It's kind of a basic idea of how you distribute the bits, recollect them, do it in a secure way for one-to-one delivery of rich media. Basically saw, first of all, the opportunity at the consumer level to get the applications out was a simple utility like WinZip, which would have a .pando file that people would email each other, so that when you were emailed the .pando file, you would have to install the app as well. As a product guy, I was very into how do you grow in an organic, cost-effective way, and this model, like a WinZip model, had this inherent virality that you can't open the .zip file unless you have the WinZip app. And so I designed software, and when I say design, I wireframed it, I wrote out kind of like a product plan for it, and then I went looking for a co-founding CTO, which I found in a guy named Laird Popkin, crazy genius, rocket science type guy who is a deep technologist, and went back to Eli Balkat from Backweb, who was already very wealthy at the time, and had a VC at the time. He had a BRM. Yeah. And I said, I have this idea. I see a market opportunity. Have a good technology co-founder. I think I might have a company that I can launch here. I need a little funding to basically bring Laird from his company, pay some salaries, and build this product. And he said, I got your back. He was very impressed with me at Backweb, and was a great mentor to me, and said, yeah, let's do it. And him and a couple of other VCs that he brought in put together a small, at the time it was called A, today we call it pre-seed, right? And we started working. And one of the things that early on we decided to do was bring in a high-powered media executive to be CEO. At the time, I felt that it would be a better choice than me running the company as a CEO, even though I was the one who kind of put it together and fundraised for it. And so Ellie and I looked together for a CEO. We found this guy, Robert Levitan, who was the CEO of iVillage and sold it for like $400 million or something like that to NBC. We brought him on early on, and so it was myself, Robert, and Laird Popkin co-founding Pando to basically build an Akamai using peer-to-peer. But we would get it distributed to the world through this consumer app that allowed people to attach files to an email. And that was the way it grew incredibly virally. We were up to, by the time I had left that company, it was 26 million consumers. We were profitable. And then we were pivoting over to the kind of enterprise side, media side of delivering for companies large files. Okay,
so and they were paying what? That was the revenue model was how so? I mean, was it, let's even go, how did you get the traction, right? So you built it, you found your CTO, your co-founder, then you brought a CEO on, so you went out there, build a product you have to sell, right? So who you're going to the BDC world first?
The go-to-market idea was B2C so that we could get a bunch of basically clients running out there with idle time that we could use for this global network. And so we were marketing it to consumers. It was inherently viral, so it grew very fast. And we were monetizing with some ads in the app and a classic freemium model, which is if you want to send a certain number of files at a certain speed, because we could rate limit the speed, it's free. And if you want to go unlimited speed or super fast speed with more files, larger file sizes, you would basically upgrade to a premium plan.
Okay.
And on that alone, we were able to run a pretty profitable business. But it wasn't still like a rocket ship like Register.com or Backweb that we saw. And we always knew we wanted to eventually pivot to like an Akamai CDN model once we had the nodes out there. So we got the nodes. We were at like tens of millions of clients running the application. And then we started doing delivery for big media companies, large game developers. Games to this day are multi-gigabytes. To download them, you need a downloader app and a distribution network. It was very expensive to do it with like an Akamai or like a level 3 at the time. And we did it at 80% efficiency in terms of cost and even speed. That was the main business.
So how many people did you end up growing the company to?
I think we were 40 people, something like that at its peak. And then, so 4 years into it, when we were doing enterprise, I realized that's less exciting for me. It's another thing. You need to be true to your own DNA and realize what you're truly passionate about and really, really good at. And I'm good at consumer product. That's kind of my specialty. It's also what I really love. And so 4 years into it, I decided, okay, I want to start my next company in the consumer space. And we were already running a profitable business. Everything was like steady state. Eventually, we were acquired by Microsoft, which was using Pando in order to power the delivery of Xbox games down to the Xbox. Till this day, if you own an Xbox at home, it has a little application that's running in Xbox for delivery of the games, and it's using Pando.
Oh, that's and so had they came to you? I mean, how do you even get them as a client? If you can remember that.
We had a sales force. We had an enterprise sales guy who would go out and knock on all the doors of the big media companies, software companies, game developers. We approached Microsoft in the context originally of games to the Xbox, and that's how. That's
Interesting. And so after that, so you left that, and you left after you exited, or you left pre-exit?
I left pre-exit because it was at a steady state.
Yeah.
And I know this about myself. I'm a startup guy. When you're now basically optimizing in an Excel spreadsheet and running a profitable business, there are CEOs who enjoy that stage much more than I do, and I think are probably better at it than I am. And so I knew that 4 years in it was the right time, and then the company was sold shortly after.
And you must have been pretty happy with that. I mean,
yeah, it was.
The feeling.
My first exit.
The first exit, the feeling of like, wow, you built something where somebody else wants it.
It has some value, yes. And I'll tell you what, as an entrepreneur, you're also pretty happy that it survives and is being used by now hundreds of millions of people, across the world to download. You might not see it; it's not a consumer app, but it is being used to kind of move bits more efficiently around the internet, and that's something that I'm proud of being a part of.
It has legs.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a company called Babbel. They were bought by Disney, and Disney just shut them down. Like
that typically happens, by the way.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. They buy it and they're excited about it when they buy it and integrate, but then they realize it's not worth it sometimes, or they move the pieces around. And so you left there, and then let's go to BillGuard, right? So BillGuard was, at the time when you started, it was a new product. There wasn't a lot of finance apps out there. Trading apps, but trading apps are not really, where personal finance is, which is really where you settled it.
Yeah. So Mint was sort of like the precursor. It was like the first personal finance app. Got everybody's attention. I was very inspired by it myself. But BillGuard was almost accidental. My wife had a charge on her credit card she didn't recognize. She came to me. That's typically always a weird conversation when the wife goes, "Hey, husband, what's this charge on my credit card?" And we both didn't recognize it, and so I Googled it. And when I Googled it, I saw all these results of people complaining about the same charge on their card. And that gave rise to the kind of lazy man's idea of, wow, what if you could collect and harness all of that human knowledge about this unstructured data of these weird billing descriptors in order to protect everybody, alert people when it's obvious that things are scammy, because humans are aware of it when they're checking their bills. And that was how BillGuard got started. This idea of crowdsourcing collective knowledge of people who are checking their bills for the majority of us who, like me, don't check our bills. Mm-hmm. So set off to kind of solve that problem, which happened to me. That's I think one of the best ways for you to really get behind the problem. If it's something that's personal, you feel it, you recognize it, you can relate, and that's what happened with Builder.
So I mean, that's I totally agree with you. I mean, the best starts are a lot of the times born from a personal experience. So you said, okay, great, had the idea. I think Raphael was your co-founder as well.
Yeah.
So how did you find them, and take us through the evolution of it, right? You have to build out, you have to wireframe the app, you have to develop it, then you have to push it out right in the app store. And did you do paid advertising? Did you do viral? PR push. What was again? Because right now you have a good marketing background, and then you switch to the product side.
Right. Yeah.
And you're really heavy on the product side, and you don't really see that a lot. I mean, it's a good thing. And now you're taking all that into this company, right? To Build Garden, you have to do both, right? You have building the product out, and then you also have to market it. And back then, even I think when did it launch? It launched in
2010, I believe.
Okay, so even it was a pain to get download stuff. It wasn't an easy thing to all of a sudden,
right.
So walk me through that a little bit.
Sure. So the first step is finding a great co-founding CTO, because I was just the product guy who could wireframe, and I did basically design the product of how I think it should look and how it should work. But then I needed somebody to build it, and I kind of used my network at the time. I really wanted this guy named Yaron Golan, who was a Sayota guy, who was at the time at Taboola and not available. But I asked him, who would you pick if you were starting this company? Because you're my blueprint. And he said, I've got two ideas for you. One is this incredibly seasoned, white-haired R&D manager, incredibly technical and capable of building a company. Second one is a 22-year-old kid who's still in the Army, but is one of the brightest and most high potential kids I've met. And I didn't have to think twice. I wanted to meet the kid right away. And I met him. And Raphael and I kind of fell in love almost on the first date, which was at a coffee shop here in Tel Aviv, and hit it off. And he built the first prototype by himself. He did the whole thing. And he had that skill set. Till this day, by the way, I think he's one of the most fundable tech entrepreneurs in all of Israel. Today he is so seasoned with his experience at Buildguard that whatever he does next, I'm going to beg him to take my money and let me invest. And he built it, and we saw very early on that there was real opportunity by simply just kind of scraping all the data that was available on the web, even before we had a network of a crowd, that we could find these anomalies and these patterns of just weird stuff, unrecognized stuff, that we could teach our system what it was and help alert people. So the original idea was to build a web app, which we marketed as an antivirus for your bills. Because we went out and we asked people, hey, if we build something that would check your bills for you and alert you anytime it found something suspicious or wrong that your bank missed, and it was free, would you want that? Of course, everybody said yes, right? Yeah, I would want that. Who would not want that? And so we were kind of believing that if we just built this thing, everybody would come. And the idea was very attractive to investors. I was already kind of a little bit of a known entity at the time from Pando, and so Adam Fisher came to my apartment one day and literally on the patio there said, "Okay, how much do you need? I'm in." And we did a $3 million seed round with basically me and a PowerPoint. So we had money. We launched this web-based antivirus for bills. We actually got quite a bit of attention. We went to TechCrunch Disrupt, and we came in as the runner-up for 2011, top startup in the world. And so we got what Paul Graham at Y Combinator calls the TechCrunch of initiation, where you get this bump of hype, and everybody comes and they register for the web app. I think we had something around 50,000 registered users to the web app. But then slowly after, you have what Paul calls the trough of sorrow, right? Where reality sets in, you don't have the hype anymore, and now you just got to actually build a product that will organically scale. It did not. Okay, talk about failures. It was a thesis that was born of a red herring, a wrong analysis of consumer intent versus consumer action. And I talk a lot about this now. I give a bunch of talks in universities all over the world, and Billgard is now a business case at Stanford. And I talk about this gap between intent and action. Most entrepreneurs who are emotionally connected to their product will go say, hey, if I build this, would you want it? And most people you ask will kind of say, because they feel bad for you as an entrepreneur, yeah, I would want it. Or if it just sounds good, they'll say, yeah, that sounds like I would want it. But that is not what you should be tracking. What you should be tracking is action, not intent. Action is what is unearthed when you look at the data of how people actually use your product, which is the classic rule: get it out there, get it early, iterate fast, learn from the mistakes, and find that cohort, that early connector cohort that actually really gives a damn about the product you're solving. And we did not do that well with the consumer app. The web app was sort of like growing flat. It wasn't scaling in a very exciting way, but in parallel, we were recognized by the banks as having some pretty innovative technology that they might want to deploy internally. And so we pivoted to the enterprise, to working with banks as a technology that they could deploy to hundreds of millions of cardholders versus us trying to sign them up one by one with our marketing budget, right? And did that for, I think, two and a half, almost 3 years. Burned through a bunch of VC money. Got, I think, half of the top 10 US banks in pilots with us. But none of them deployed in that period of time, and we were running out of VC money. Classic rule that a really, really young startup should not be beholden to a really, really large enterprise unless you are one of the top 3 strategic priorities in the next 12 months for that enterprise, and we were not. We were a kind of nice to have cost optimization for a fraud department at a bank, and that rendered us way low in the priority list. We were running out of money, and then we had a big decision to make. Do we kind of wait and let our destiny be dictated by a few VPs at large banks, or do we take our destiny in our own hand and figure out a way to grow this thing on our own?
Just I'll stop here. So, were you upset at yourself when you had a lot of success in your other startup, and then you realized you came there, and you're saying to yourself like, "Yeah, I thought it, but my assumptions were off." Were you kicking yourself? Because I know that the end story is great. I mean, you pivoted, and I didn't know you pivoted. By the way, I did not. I was just okay. You built an app, and that's what I remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember the early side
right.
of it. But were you kicking yourself a little bit? Well, like, how the hell did this happen to me? Like, I should have known better.
Yeah. So I have the ultimate good fortune of having the number one, I think, characteristic that any entrepreneur should have, which is optimism. Almost naive optimism. Like, you just kind of think, it's going to work out. I'll figure it out. It's going to be okay, And I'm an optimist, and I don't get down on myself and say, oh, God, I shouldn't have done it. I definitely have regrets. I definitely am very cognizant of my mistakes. I like to think I fail forward, meaning I learn from the mistakes and make the appropriate adjustments. I've made more mistakes than probably anyone listening to this podcast. Like, we didn't get into all that stuff, but along the way, in order to find the right path, you've got to try and fail until you find the right path of what's called product market fit. In the case of Billgard, I was a little disappointed in myself of not remembering the previous lesson learned, which was stay true to your DNA, who you are. A company is basically an extension of the founders, and Raphael and I are consumer people. We are passionate about and very good at building consumer apps, and we were sitting in a bunch of bank boardrooms. I hired up a bunch of salespeople and marketing people to sell into banks. It wasn't me. It wasn't true to what I was good at or loved. And I was a little bit upset at myself that I didn't recognize that from the previous mistake that I had made. And I think it's, unfortunately, the law of startup physics that no matter what, I don't care how seasoned you are, You're going to make mistakes, and sometimes you're going to repeat them, including the ones that you would mentor another entrepreneur not to do. But once you're in the trenches, you're not the coach looking from the sideline, you naturally fall into these traps of, wow, a C-level executive at Citibank called me in and said, we'll put budget of X millions of dollars to deploy this thing in the next year. And I believed her.
Yeah.
You understand? And that was me being a little bit naive.
Yeah. No, which, again, I think 90% of people that the same thing, they would do the same thing. You know, it's not like, but again, so great. So that happened. Then you realize, let's go back down to your product people. Let's go to the B2C world.
Yes.
That's where we live.
That's right.
And so you built an app.
Exactly right. And by the way, I want to give some credit where credit's due. My investors who were on the sidelines as coaches were telling me the advice of, listen, do not wait on these big banks. It's not your strength. It's not the real opportunity here for the product and the technology. Let's first build a massive consumer app, and then later, well, we might sell some technology to banks. But I'll never forget this meeting with Vinod Khosla at Khosla Ventures led our Series B, and he sat down to me before he wrote our check for the Series B round, which is a $10 million round, and he said, "I disagree that you should go to the banks. I'm going to give you the money anyway. We're going to give you enough to make this mistake, but make sure you don't run out of this money before you go back to consumer." Yeah. He literally said that to me before signing the term sheet. And I was like, okay, I'm going to prove him wrong. And he was right. And I really owe him a bunch of gratitude that he let me make the mistake. Okay? That's a very important, I think, dynamic between investors and founders, that sometimes you've got to have the market slap the entrepreneur around and show them reality, rather than just a mentor saying, do what I say because I'm right. No one really knows unless you try. And we tried. We burned through a couple $1 million of VC money. We had enough money. We pivoted back to consumer. And this time, when we went back into the consumer space, we learned from all the mistakes of the web app, which was, number one, if it is a web-based security product where you're supposed to set it and forget it, and it'll alert you when something bad happens, you'll have zero virality because you have zero engagement. If you have zero virality, you have very high costs of acquiring a customer. Mm-hmm. You're basically a security company like a LifeLock or a Symantec, which nobody ever talks to their buddies about at the baseball game, going, "Hey man, I love my McAfee. You gotta get McAfee." Yeah. Right? So you don't have word of mouth, you don't have organic, you spend hundreds of dollars on what's called FUD marketing, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And we didn't have that money, so we said, we're not going back to market with a security product. We are going to figure out a way to build a lean forward, high engaged app that will almost trick you into checking your bills, so that we could build this network of intelligence through the crowd. And so we built a mobile app, not a web app. We made it designed like an email inbox that you would quickly swipe through transactions that we would recommend you look at. We collected all the data centrally. We taught our algorithms what's a good email, or what's a good transaction or bad transaction. And it really started working. And this is credit to the product team here in Israel, which was led by Raphael. We were down at the pixel level. Every click, every UI was thought meticulously on engagement and retention. And we built this really, really great product that grew tremendously. I mean, we were at 2 million registered customers, and I'll skip ahead here, by the time we were approached to be acquired, and growing, for a couple of dollars to acquire a customer. It was very, very efficient because of its inherent virality as a great consumer app that people were telling each other about. Yeah, wow, that's a great story there. All right, so how many people did you end up having at BuildGuard? So we also were around I think at the peak, 35, 40. And how was the environment of the company? Like, did you? It was incredible. We had a beautiful office, on Rothschild, the corner of Allenby, like the heart of the Israeli tech scene. We really hired some incredible, young, intelligent, kind, loving people. Like, we had an incredible culture at BuildGuard. I think we're going to have a BuildGuard mafia, like the PayPal mafia, because a bunch of these folks are all entrepreneurs. Building great companies, like you have Ido and Asaf at Riskify, for example, and some other ones starting companies now. So it was a really, really great group of people, some of the best I've worked with.